Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are here watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Per Year. Welcome. Great to have you here. And I am, as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
Great to be back alongside you, Eugene. Great show we have planned.
We have a very good show. We've got many different things we want to cover. But before we even get into a little bit of a preview here, just want to remind you, since you are watching on YouTube, to make sure you hit the subscribe button and also hit the bell so that you can get the alerts for the things that you have subscribed to here at Breakthrough News, including, among other things, Dispatches with Rania Khalek. So you wouldn't want to miss any of that content that's coming out very frequently, and many other things, of course. So hit subscribe, hit the bell, and you will be all good to go. So you're following all of our Breakthrough News content. You don't have to go looking for it. Rania, if you will, what other things should our viewers know?
Well, our viewers should know that they can help support Breakthrough News during a crucial time when independent media has never been as important as it is today by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and becoming a patron. As a member of Breakthrough News, you can get access to exclusive content, including part of my show, Dispatches, as well as Eugene's monthly seminar on Africa, and very cool merch, which I'm proud to be reunited with my awesome Breakthrough News mug. If you don't have one, go get one by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Breakthrough News.
Indeed.
And you can also donate in the chat, in the live chat. For a one-time donation, you can also donate at our website, breakthroughnews.org. And for those who are watching, one important way to help Breakthrough News is to make sure that you are subscribed to Breakthrough News on all platforms, including YouTube. But not just YouTube. We're also on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok at BT Newsroom. And for those who are watching on YouTube, please make sure to like the show. Smash that like button. I think we need like a recording of that, like of me saying that, where like Matt can play it in the background. It can just be like, smash that like button every time like I want to scold our audience for not liking the show enough. So that's my new proposal.
Well, as you can see, you guys are now also a part of the Breakthrough News editorial meeting. So I guess comment in the chat if you think that Rania should have some sort of smash that like button recording that we can play on demand, on command,
so.
Whichever one of those is more appropriate. But yes, please, if you could, if you do indeed like what we're doing, please like it so that it not only helps us the algorithm, but
that like button.
Oh, this is
how awesome would that be? You just press a button. You just press. No one even has to say anything. You just press a button, and you hear me say that.
Well, thanks for breaking down the mechanics of that one. That's. It's hard to even really know where to go from that one, but it just shows that we're always thinking about how to improve the product that you get here at the Freedom Side, so to speak. So happy to have you here. Obviously, we've got a great show for you, as we always do, going around the world as we always do, many different topics. Of course, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, framing a lot of the topics we have here tonight, and in terms of how it's really affecting almost every aspect of the world. But we'll also hit on a few other very relevant issues, as it goes. But of course, we'll be talking about the impact of pushes for a ceasefire in various elected bodies here in the United States, talking some about how German politics is changing, perhaps in some very big ways, with the creation of a new left-leaning party. We'll be chatting with some of the individuals who are working on the campaign to, quote, abandon Biden, so the impact of the Gaza genocide on his electoral chances. Of course, we'll also be discussing Biden's attempts to use the South Carolina vote coming up early next month in order to appropriate, I would say, quite a bit of the black vote, or at least to try to court it by doing a little cultural appropriation, if you will. We'll also, of course, be talking about Iran, and there's a lot to be said about Iran. I mean, of course, vis-a-vis Palestine, but also everything that's been happening with Pakistan, terrorist attacks in Iran, all these different pieces. So this would be a great time for you to tell people however you feel is necessary that we are here and that we are live so that whoever is following you can be following us. I don't know, I don't even really want to make too many suggestions because I don't know exactly where you are. Also, shout out to Landis for your donation right as we get started here at the top of the hour. I appreciate that. Right below you, you can continue to donate throughout the whole show, I guess, at least as it were. So, Rania, before we get to our first guest here, one thing that's notable that we've talked about on the show quite a bit in the past couple weeks is the ongoing issue of whether or not the United States Congress is going to pass a bill that will send a lot of money, $60 billion to Ukraine, $14 billion to Israel to buy weapons, some other large subset of billions to Taiwan, and then, of course, spend billions of more dollars on what you could almost call the war on the border. Well, as of us going live here today, that deal is apparently at risk of collapse because President Donald Trump is saying that it is, former President Donald Trump is saying that it's too weak on the border. There's, people reporting he doesn't want a deal that would make it harder for him to campaign on immigration. But really kind of an amazing statement about where our politics are right now, Rania, that that Democrats who claim to be the party of immigrants and promoting immigration are willing to sign up to an extremely draconian bill that would make it very difficult, for individuals to actually seek even their sort of legal rights to seek asylum and other things like that. Ultimately, what's important about that, things Democrats said they would never do in order to send $60 billion to Ukraine. I mean, it's also to Israel, but it's really more about Ukraine. As people have probably seen, they're sending all these weapons to Israel, like over congressional opinion. They're doing all these other things. So it seems like they have a little bit more of a workaround to help the Israelis keep the genocide going here now. But it does seem, at least according to the Pentagon, that things are stalling there on Ukraine funding. But nonetheless, it's just an amazing situation it feels like we're in, where this is the debate in the U.S. Congress. Like, militarize the border, militarize Ukraine in a completely losing war, help Israel commit genocide. Like this, fix the collapsing bridges, help the, 2 million people who might get left out of WIC, give more people health care. All of that is like, we're not even going to talk about that. But when it comes to just giving more money to wars, here we are.
It's incredible. It really is. And it just shows you that both of the parties that were stuck with this like two-party dictatorship gives us no choice when it comes to American empire, right? Like our choices are always these like small things that aren't even really choices because, we're supposed to vote over abortion or access to it. But under Joe Biden, because there was like a coup in the Supreme Court, a right-wing coup under Joe Biden, it didn't even matter having a Democratic president at the end of the day because they still took it away. Right? So we're just stuck with these two parties that have these small differences. But at the end of the day, Democrats will always vote with fascists if it means making sure the sustainability and continuity of American empire stays on like the path of empire. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that they can also get away with voting. You're really just going to vote with a bunch of, like, at this point, the Republican Party or the Trump wing of it, it's like just the most far right, disgusting, like rotten, just like underbelly of America. And you're going to vote with that because that's how important it is to continue a proxy war in Ukraine and to maintain American like fascistic dominance around the world. It's really disgusting. And it just shows that the Democrats are not actually the so-called lesser evil, if the lesser evil are willing to vote with the people they claim are like the worst people in the whole world.
Yeah, I mean, it really is amazing. We'll have to get into it more later, but it'd be an unbelievable attack on people coming to the country. And by the way, I'll just say this to close. People aren't going to stop coming. So anyone who thinks that any of this is going to work, putting all of the more military, all that's going to happen is more people are going to die, more people are going to spend a lot of money paying deeply unscrupulous people to smuggle them over the border, which means also more people are going to die. And it'll create a bigger humanitarian crisis in Mexico where people will be waiting on the other side of the border, desperately trying to get in using a glitchy app that they have to use now on their phone to even apply for these things. So anyone who thinks these are solutions, they're not solutions. But nonetheless, we want to turn our attention now well, to a city where this has been an issue, but a different issue there, the city of Chicago, which may be on the verge of becoming the largest city in the United States to declare that it is in favor of a ceasefire. The mayor came out yesterday. There is a bill in front of the alders there in Chicago. There was a delayed vote, but nonetheless, to get into all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined for this conversation by Rozanna Rodriguez Sanchez, who is an alderwoman for the 33rd Ward of Chicago and also the chair of the Committee on Health and Human Relations. Alderwoman, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, we are really, really happy to have you here. And you, I believe, are the original sponsor of the bill to call for a ceasefire. Before we get into some of what's happening with that, what motivated you to put this in? Why is it important for the city of Chicago to get on record that it supports a ceasefire in Gaza?
From a personal standpoint, I am from Puerto Rico. I am from a colonized nation, and our struggle has always been linked to the Palestinian struggle. From the perspective of the being an elected official here in Chicago, I represent an incredibly diverse community. There's so many Palestinians in my community and in Chicagoland. Like, we have the biggest population of Palestinians in the whole country.
So this was supposed to be voted on this week, right? But there was a delay in the vote due to I think 28 older persons signing this letter that requesting that there be a delay in this vote on a ceasefire from the city of Chicago over the sensitivity of International Holocaust Remembrance Day on Saturday, which of course seems bizarre because if you learn anything from the Holocaust, it's that we should be against atrocities, right? So can you talk a bit about what happened in that fight at City Hall yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about yesterday, but this is a fight that has been going on for a little bit longer than that. We introduced this resolution. I introduced the resolution in November, but it was sent to the Committee on Rules by one of my colleagues, and that means that it would be incredibly hard to get it out of there. So we ended up introducing a new resolution in December. I have been trying to work with colleagues to explain the urgency of this matter. My colleague sent that letter trying to delay the vote. Although I spoke about the fact that I disagreed with the premise of that statement, that Holocaust Remembrance Day should actually move us to talk about the need to make sure that it never happens again to anybody, to anyone, nowhere, ever. I did understand the need for strategy at this point, and I know that I could bring more people on board if I delayed the vote. So although it was incredibly painful to sit through the remarks that were, some of my colleagues would repeatedly use the words "never again" in the chambers where there were so many Palestinians sitting in the audience. I did understand that strategically it was the option to make sure that we can pass a ceasefire resolution ultimately.
I'm wondering if you're feeling encouraged by the level of support for a ceasefire in Chicago. I mean, I'm in New York, but at least what I can see in the outside, I mean, you got the mayor. I know there was the Rainbow Push Summit, but I mean, for anyone who's following the protests, Chicago has been one of the centers in the United States of protest and solidarity with Palestine. So, despite the sort of mechanics of the vote, are you feeling encouraged by seeing the reaction among Chicagoans to what's happening here?
Oh, for sure. And it has been like this from the very beginning. Movement here has been incredibly strong, and it just keeps growing, and not the cold, not the frigid temperatures, the snow, nothing have been able to stop people from going in the streets. It has always been beautiful to see so many of our Jewish siblings come out and do civil disobedience and take over the streets as well. So of course that has created a lot of pressure. Chicago is a progressive city. I think that most people are in favor of a ceasefire right now, and we need to listen to people.
You mentioned that this has been a very long fight, and you did help lead this resolution towards a ceasefire. So I imagine that has provoked a great deal of backlash for you. I mean, we know in American politics, this is a very, I wouldn't say it's necessarily as controversial among constituencies, but when it comes to actual politics, there's a lot of pressure groups that, go into action whenever anybody tries to push back against the government of Israel. So what has been the backlash that you've received? And when you talk about this being a long fight, what has that fight looked like?
Well, the beginning of this fight looked like a resolution that was introduced by one of my colleagues expressing unconditional support for Israel. We had to have a hearing about that resolution. It was a special council meeting, and I was the no vote on record. After I took that no vote, I started receiving death threats, rape threats. It became a very violent sort of environment, and what I did was that I continued to move and organize with my colleagues and with the organizations that are on the ground to make sure that I had the support that I needed, and that's the way that it has happened so far.
You mentioned this at the outset, but I just wanted to hit it again because I think it's a really important element of this that, as a Puerto Rican, you felt a special affinity here, not only to bring this, but in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I was hoping you could just talk about that a little more because I feel in the mainstream American discourse, many people are taught and don't even think of Puerto Rico as a colonized territory.
Yeah, well, I come from a pro-independence household. I saw so many people around me be criminalized for being pro-independence. My father had a COINTEL profile. So I feel like Puerto Ricans have experienced firsthand historically so many of the same things that happened to colonized nations. There was a moment in Puerto Rico where people were not allowed to wave the Puerto Rican flag, and anybody who had a Puerto Rican flag risked going to prison for over a decade. Any show of national pride, any show of identity, right, was punished. Our island town of Vieques was bombed by the U.S. Navy for 60 years. So there are so many similarities in our access to land and resources, in the ways in which we get to make decisions or not make any decisions about our economy, about our agriculture. I think that our struggles are deeply connected. And I feel deeply the struggle and the pain of Palestinians at this moment. And I think that it is our duty to come out and fight for peace and against the occupation.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will continue to follow this story. I'm sorry, Ron, you want to jump in?
Well, I just wanted to ask one more thing,
please,
because I think it's really interesting that a city is going to vote on this measure. I wasn't even aware. I guess a city could, but why not? So I guess my question is what's the significance of that? Let's say this passes, right? What does that mean going forward? What's the significance of Chicago and other cities passing a resolution calling for a ceasefire?
I think the more we talk about it and the more there is legitimacy, right, from government bodies that represent people saying that this is wrong, that we need a ceasefire, that the way that Israel is acting towards Palestine is incredibly cruel. It makes a difference in the political landscape. It makes a difference in the public opinion. And we need to be able to challenge the moments in which our government is acting in ways that go against the values of our communities. So it is very important for Chicago to take a stance right now, particularly being that Chicagoland has the biggest Palestinian population in the U.S.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we will continue to follow this. It's a very, very important story. Rozanna Rodriguez Sanchez, representing the 33rd Ward of Chicago. Thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I really do appreciate anybody who's involved in American politics on any level putting themselves, out there on this issue, because I know it's not easy. And like she said, I mean, it's just incredible the amount of vitriol and backlash that is prompted by anybody who dares to stand up for the rights of Palestinians. So yeah. I appreciate that. And if anybody else in a position of power is watching and is like sort of on that line of should I say or do something or shouldn't I, do it, guys. There's like hospitals being attacked deliberately by the Israelis because not enough people in positions of power are putting themselves on the line. So do something.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point. Sorry, I'm choking a little bit here, but I'm okay.
But I also act like I'm like the head of CIA is definitely watching.
Yeah, well, listen, William Burns. If William Burns is watching, I don't even know why, but nonetheless, I think it's a very good point, and it does show. People say, well, what is the impact of protesting? But this vote, even though it was delayed, it's people. If you look at it in the context, you had the mayor Brandon Johnson, who, by the way, when there was the first resolution that Rozanna mentioned, the sort of uncritical support resolution, he just kind of, because the mayor presides over the alders in Chicago, he was basically silent, and it would seem like he just didn't want to get in the way. I know that there were some photos of him circulating with some, I don't know if it was AIPAC, but some like prominent Zionists in the region. And then now, sort of unexpectedly, yesterday he comes out for a ceasefire. Delio Ramirez has come up for a ceasefire. I believe Jonathan Jackson, who represents the first ward of Chicago. So it's like there's a groundswell happening here, and I don't think you would have that if you didn't have the people who are shutting down Lakeshore Drive, who are going to downtown, in huge numbers on a regular basis. And, the one thing they say about Chicago is you never really live there if you haven't walked backwards for 2 blocks to avoid the wind. So people are going out in some pretty tough conditions, I have to say. But it's been gratifying. You see some of those photos there. And that, again, like for people who don't know Chicago, this is not something that people normally are able to do. You really have to challenge the state to be able to go out and block Lakeshore Drive, which is one of the biggest things. You really have to be out here in a wager way, in a way that they can't deny. So it's been, I think, quite interesting. Of course, San Francisco is a city that has voted in favor of a ceasefire. There's a couple others that are now eluding me. There's smaller cities, but obviously Chicago's third largest city in America. So that would be huge, I think. And it comes as SEIU, the largest union in America, has called for a ceasefire. The statement was a little, I wouldn't have written it that way. But nonetheless, the fact that people are feeling compelled, like big institutional players now just don't want to be left behind, I think says, I mean, some of them I'm sure are doing it out of their own hearts, but I think a lot of these people are doing it because their own members, their own voters, their own, people who they rely on are basically saying you must do something. So I know it can be difficult because this thing is happening day in and day out, but you can see that there's movement. And as Congressman Andre Carson told you, Rania, as we have in the interview with him, politicians are feeling the heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think, first of all, wool socks. I just want to throw wool socks out there. It's something I learned recently because I'm not used to the cold. Wool socks make all the difference. Thank you to my sister for teaching me that during the recent protests in Washington, D.C. Why? Wow. Why? No, I'm just giving people a PSA.
You want another sock tip? Tractor Supply, best place to buy socks.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This I did not know. Thank you. Yep. Thank you for taking that seriously. But no, on a more serious note, though, I am serious about wool socks in the cold. No, you're absolutely right. And I think something else that Andre Carson said that I guess I should repeat is those who do support a ceasefire and support Palestine should be rewarded. And those who don't should be punished with your leverage. And our leverage isn't just as voters, but we do have an election coming up. And, I have to say it's incredible to me that there are people, politicians, public figures who, without even waiting to make a demand, just throw their support behind Joe Biden. I mean, what is the point? What is the point of if you have leverage to literally support this man before you even demanded anything? To just say, I'll automatically support you because I have a gun to my head because Donald Trump. Yeah. But actually, use your leverage. I mean, everyone's welcome to do what they're going to do. Fine. But what is the point of being someone, for example, like AOC, right? who you go into office saying you're going to use your leverage. And then when it comes down to the leverage you have, you just give your support away without asking for anything in return. It's incredible.
Indeed. You'd wish more of these people watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But nonetheless, we will turn to another parliamentarian, an elected official who has been doing a lot of work to demand a ceasefire amongst many, many other fantastic and good causes. We are very, very honored to be joined here once again by Sevim Dagdelen, who is a minister of parliament in the Bundestag in Germany and a founder of the brand new party, the Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance for Reason and Fairness. Sevim, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me, Eugene.
You're making a lot of news. I've seen you all over the media in the UK, everywhere, because the new party that you have helped form is really a political earthquake there in Germany. Tell us, maybe just to start, why you felt the need to be part of founding a new party in Germany and what you're hoping it can do for the politics there in your country.
Yes, in Germany, we are living in a time of, not just in Germany, worldwide global political crisis and more wars with more potential of escalation at this time for all times. The Federal Republic of Germany has the in its history, short-sighted and very incompetent. And more people in Germany no longer feel represented by the establishment, by the political parties. They rightly feel that the government no longer represents their interests and that the established parties hardly differ on key political issues. Both the three governmental parties, the Social Democrats, the Greens and the Liberals, but also the largest opposition party, the Conservative Christian Democrats, support a toxic policy mix of participating in US-proxy wars, such as in Ukraine or in Gaza, implementing economic sanctions and rearmament, while at the same time reducing social spending and actually cutting social spending. So the consequences in Germany are a shrinking economy, poor infrastructure, and exploding energy prices and inflation. And that's why this unsettles many people. They don't know what to vote for, or out of desperation, they turn to the right-wing parties. And we want to form a party because things can't go on as they are at the moment. Otherwise, we risk that our country will no longer be recognizable in 10 years' time. So my former party, the Left Party, has also failed on the issue of peace and abandoned its anti-war policies and positions and became a party of, yes, you can say progressive neoliberalism, like Nancy Fraser describes, together with a focus on identity politics rather than left-wing class politics, economic and social policy in the interest of the working class people. This strategy has led to one election defeat after another for years. And at the same time, the extreme right party is gaining strength. So the right-wing Alternative for Germany is polling at over 20% nationwide and even over 30% in some federal states in the east of Germany. So we believe that things cannot go on like this. That's why I left my former party, the Left Party, last October, together with 9 other members of the German Parliament, to set up a new party, the Alliance Sahra Wagenknecht for Reason and Justice. And our program has 4 pillars. So first of all, our first important goal is we want economic policy of reason and for the preservation of economic strengths. So especially the economy in Germany is very much dependent on the geopolitical interests of the US. I just want to say that, for example, the sanctions, the economic warfare against Russia, the energy sanctions, they hit us, the German economy, and the US economy is benefiting from this. So that's why we need more reasonable economy policy. We need a return to reason, especially in economic policy, because Germany is a country poor in raw materials and strong in exports. So a large part of prosperity depends on industrial value creation. So that's why I think we need the cheap energy again from Russia, and we are in favor of the reparation of the pipeline to Russia, and again getting cheap gas, cheap energy from Russia for our economy. Secondly, our country needs social equality, more social justice should be at the top of the political agenda. This is our second aim. And thirdly, it is a major mistake that the German government, has turned away from the important tradition of détente to which Germany owes its reunification, and no longer relies on mediation, balancing interests, and diplomacy, but instead it's playing the military card in more and more conflicts around the world. So we believe conflicts and wars as those in Ukraine and in the Middle East, in Gaza, cannot be resolved militarily. So that's why it needs a strong political force that consistently promotes peace, diplomacy, and negotiated solution. And fourthly, this is my last point, a major concern is to widen the corridor of opinions again. We want to stop the cancel culture, what is a poison for democracy. We must protect the freedom of speech. It's just the way debates are conducted, where anyone who does not agree with the mainstream opinion bubble is quickly defamed. And this is unworthy for a democracy, and it's poison for our democracy. And according to surveys, for example, almost half of the population in Germany no longer dares to speak their mind openly outside of a protected space. And I think this is the poison for democracy. That's why our fourth pillar is freedom of speech. And this is why we are now heading this weekend to our founding party conference that will take place in Berlin, attended by 450 members all over Germany, as well as 100 guests and 100 journalists. And according to a very lately survey, around 17% in Germany would like to see our chairwoman, Sahra Wagenknecht, as a chancellor. I think this is a good for our party.
Mm-hmm.
Sevim, I appreciate you breaking all that down, and I feel like there's so many parallels to a lot of the problems we have in the U.S., at least in U.S. politics, in terms of the sort of narrow confines of what's allowed in the mainstream of progressive politics. And you mentioned something in particular, and that's kind of bringing back anti-war politics to the left. And that's so important. And we have that missing in the U.S. as well. You talked a bit about the Ukraine proxy war. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the position that your party has on Israel's destructive war in Gaza. And obviously Germany is, as a country, is very much not just in support of Israel's genocide there, but is in many ways a participant in giving so much legal and diplomatic cover, and of course, constantly aiding Israel and whatever it asks for, all in service of supposedly making up for Germany's past crimes when Germany was, a Nazi country and carried out the Holocaust. So can you talk a bit about your party's position on Gaza?
Well, I think, first of all, the mass protests for a ceasefire in Gaza in numerous European countries, for example, in the UK, or the large German demonstrations for peace in Ukraine, show that there is a popular dissatisfaction with Europe's and Germany's foreign policy of unconditional submission to the US hegemonic policy, supporting all these US proxy wars. And so the establishment is coming under increasing pressure on these issues. And our party we are the only party in the German parliament which is in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza, in Israel and Palestine, in the Middle East. The Alliance, Sahra Wagenknecht in Germany, is the only party in the German parliament to speak out in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza and to call for an end to German armed deliveries to Israel, because Germany is, after the United States and United Kingdom, the third largest arms supplier for Israel. And I think this is shameful. This is this is scandal. But it also shows, regarding Gaza and Ukraine, in principle, Europe must become an independent player instead of being a pawn in the conflict between the major powers and a vessel to the United States. And this also applies, as I said, with regard to the Middle East conflict.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you've also been working on a worldwide level of this concerns. You're working with, well, many people now, but Congresswoman Ilhan Omar here in the United States to rally parliamentarians around the whole globe for a ceasefire. Talk about that initiative and why it was important for you to reach across national borders in order to wage this fight.
Well, in view of the suffering in the region, and especially of the people in Gaza and the West Bank, I believe there is no alternative to an immediate ceasefire. And I know a ceasefire is not everything, but without a ceasefire is everything nothing. And that is why at a meeting in Washington last December, I decided together with Ilhan Omar to initiate a global call by parliamentarians for a ceasefire in Gaza. And our global call is now supported by over 520 parliamentarians, elected MPs from more than 30 countries. And together we call for an immediate multilateral ceasefire in Israel and Palestine, the release of all remaining Israeli and international hostages, and the facilitation of humanitarian aid to Gaza. And we call for respect for international law, not only the international law, but also for the prosecution of serious human rights violation. And the support is politically very broad and international. Our aim is to further increase international pressure for an end to the war and a political solution. And I think more than 10,000 Palestinians have already died as a result of this Israel's and ruthless warfare following the Hamas massacre on October the 7th. So we want to call on our governments to put an end to this horror. And by supporting the Israeli warfare, the West shares responsibility for the mass murder of Palestinians.
And Sevim, I'm just curious, a lot of what you're talking about is quite controversial in the German mainstream, as you know. So how has your new party and its program been greeted, been received by Germany, if at all? Are they even giving you attention?
Oh, the attention is very big. So we get really thousands of supporters. A lot of people wants to join us, but we are very, very careful at the moment. We want to grow very slow and very controlled, because I think we have to watch who wants to be a member of our party. Is he supporting 100% our program, or is he thinking very differently on the 4 pillars I described? So reasonable economic policy, for peace policy, against the cancel culture, and so on, and in favor of social justice. So we are very, very concerned about the growth of our party. So that's why it's controlled and it's very slow. And the media attention is big. And for example, at the first press conference, Sahra Wagenknecht called Gaza a free prison for the Palestinians, and as a prison. And some media wanted to attack us because we used this term. But, even the senator of the Democrats, Bernie Sanders, is using this term, and even the UN special rapporteurs are using this term. So I think they, at the moment, they are watching, they are observing, they are waiting, because everyone is very much concerned about the rise of the right-wing party, the Alternative for Germany, which is a party for the very rich people. It's an anti-working class party. It's a militarist party. It is in favor of drone strikes. It is in favor of interventions, military interventions. It's in favor of armament, the 2% goal of the NATO. It's a NATO party, pro-NATO party. So I think we have to really challenge them as what they are, a militaristic party for the industrial complex, the military industrial complex in Germany. And there is a slight likeliness and chance that we as the Alliance Sahra Wagenknecht could combat and stop the rise of this far-right party. And this is why I think the attention is very, very big at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly I think our attention is very focused on this, and there are many people around the world who I think are very excited to see this take place. So we're very, very honored to have had you with us again. Sevim Dagdelen, a representative of the BSW party in the Bundestag in Germany. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks for having me, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Well, Sevim is awesome. Sevim is awesome. I'm so glad we got to get her on. I'm so excited about her new party. And I wish that in the US we had more parties so that we could have a new party emerge that represents the interests of most Americans as opposed to this horrible two-party system that we're trapped in.
Indeed. Well, it'll be interesting to see. I think they have a very good chance of doing well, which is scaring a lot of people. There's a lot of smears out there, but even the economists says they think they will do quite well. I think it's clear from the polls. So we'll continue to follow it and continue to bring it to you. And, it's happening. There's a big farmers' revolt all across Europe, especially France and Germany. So a lot happening on that front and the ripple effects, especially because of the war in Ukraine. Nonetheless, we want to keep our attention on electoral affairs here. And that is how the genocide in Gaza is seemingly seriously impacting the opportunity, or the chances rather, for President Joe Biden in this year's election. And there is in fact an effort going under the hashtag Abandon Biden that has taken up this mantle. I'm very happy to talk about that. And we are very honored to be joined by Hassan Abdel Salam, who's a professor of human rights at the University of Minnesota and an organizer with the Abandon Biden campaign. Hassan, thank you so much for being with us.
Such a pleasure. Thanks, Rania. Thanks, Eugene. It's great to connect, and thanks for the amazing work that you've been doing.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It is great to connect. This is, in many ways become one of the biggest stories in the United States, is how is it going to impact Biden that he has been backing this genocide just, to the hilt from the very beginning. But maybe let's just talk about why you all felt the need to organize something. It was obvious that people were angry, but to turn it into sort of a real organized instrument around the fall vote.
After the attacks took place in Gaza, I reached out to a colleague and I told him I'm someone who works in strategy, sociology, and human rights. I'm a professor of human rights, and I realized that the protests were being sort of experienced in a diffusive way by the political elites. They were ignoring it partly because it wasn't directly messaged to them. And so I reached out and said, this is probably not going to work. What we need to do in order to save lives is to pledge not to vote as a community and to actively campaign against Mr. Biden. That we had the numbers in the swing states, Muslim Americans and their allies, African Americans, Latinx people, progressive youth, libertarians, to stop this. And so we decided that this was the way to pressure Mr. Biden. And the experience has been, as you mentioned, a bit of a roller coaster, as we've had the opportunity to even connect with the White House, who has been trying to stop us even before our very conference in Dearborn on the 2nd of December, when we had representatives from each of the swing states dedicating and committing to delivering each swing state away from Mr. Biden.
Well, one of the things that, I think is notable about this, and an important aspect of it, is everyone says, well, if you don't vote for Trump, it's going to be really bad. And if you're not a Muslim, people say, especially for Muslims. And of course, for all of us who are progressive, we remember, of course, the first Trump presidency. We remember everything that's happened, after 9/11 and before. So it's sort of a potent argument, but it seems to be a little bit misplaced given where this campaign is originating from. But I'm wondering how you respond to that, because I think, this sort of fear-based politics is a big part of how, the Democrats are trying to keep people from straying.
Absolutely. And I could tell you, as we've been organizing in all the swing states, leaders, Abandon Biden leaders across the country have started off often asking, what do we do? What's the alternative? And the answer really is that often the way it's framed is that an alternative has to be the last name of a candidate. That's the response that often creates satisfaction. But what I ask is, don't ask for an alternative candidate, ask for an alternative world. And so one of the most important things for us to think about as we look back is Mr. Trump most definitely prevented our friends and colleagues and family members from entering the country. But Mr. Biden killed them. And so when people create this formula of the lesser of two evils, in truth, this is so wretched that the equation of the lesser of two evils should not be part of our moral thinking. This is so beyond and something that as Americans we should never accept, that we have to send a signal to the entire political landscape. By actually making Mr. Biden lose, we would begin a reckoning, a conversation with the Democratic Party to move towards bringing human rights and civil rights in foreign policy. We can't have the Inflation Reduction Act and fight for climate change, which is something Muslim Americans and their allies want. And we can't fight to end police brutality and improve the status of undocumented people and remove the wall that divides us between different countries, including Mexico, as well as to ensure that there's Medicare for all and Social Security for each person. And then on the other hand, kill human beings across the planet with impunity, without even recognizing and grieving their lives, as you saw in the letter from the White House after 100 days. Palestinian lives were not grieved in the same way. We fought so hard in this country for civil rights. The Martin Luther King, who fought for voting rights and civil rights, is often the one that is propped up and imagined as the Martin Luther King that everyone loves. But there's another Martin Luther King that everyone ignored that we're following and abandoned Biden. It's the Martin Luther King who fought against having this Vietnam War and the deaths that constantly were being tallied, and no one was speaking out. America, if it stands for anything and believes in itself as being based on freedom of expression, on dignity, on ending cruelty, on being sovereign, then how can we then turn and with our own weapons destroy and shed bodies? People in our own mosques and cultural centers come to us and they tell us statements I've never heard. They say, someone, when we were doing a press conference, was saying, we were having a press conference as we were, one of the ways in which we launched the Abandon Biden campaigns is a press conference, and one of the speakers called me and so calmly said, you know, Hassan, an hour ago, I just learned that I lost 24 members of my family. And 24 members. This is a situation in which we are hearing this, and we're hearing our friends and colleagues, and we're all brothers and sisters. No American citizen should be saying such statements in this country to one another. And so we're dedicated to the idea that to abandon Biden is really emerging because he has truly abandoned us. He's abandoned the value of life. He's abandoned the Democratic Party's positions on dignity and worth and inclusion and diversity. And he has persisted. We were trying, we gave him till October 31st, if you look back at the abandoned Biden history. And we had a ceasefire deadline day press conference. We said that was enough. We cannot say any more ceasefire now. We want it, but now even if it happens, we must abandon, because imagine rewarding a candidate after killing people for 100 days. That would be like someone coming to you and saying, well, the lesser of two evils is still the case for you must select this candidate who killed your parents. I'm not going to vote for someone who killed.
Oh, I think we have lost Hassan. Well, okay. Oh, there. Sorry, there was a little glitch. Hey, Hassan. Can we hear him? I can't hear you.
Can he hear us?
Oh, yeah. Are you able to hear us? I don't know if he can hear us because he's not responding to that.
Check on that.
Well, that was very powerful what he was saying. I mean, that was
Yep.
really incredibly powerful what he was saying, because
Yep.
hopefully we can get that sorted out, because I wanted to ask one more question before we wrapped that. But I mean, it really is unbelievable that, you know, I can already see it happening. There's going to be this attempt come November 2024 by the same people who did it in 2020 to try to blame like Arabs if they were and Muslims if they refused to vote for Biden. But I mean, how can you tell somebody who's lost their family, whose family has been murdered by a genocide facilitated by the Democratic Party's leader, Joe Biden, who, and I mean, I think you made a really good point about, what were you going to say, Eugene?
Oh, no, I'm just agreeing.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for agreeing. But yeah, and I think at this point, it's a recognition that, you know, not only is it facilitation of a genocide, it is enthusiastic facilitation of a genocide, where even in announcing the 100 days, you had that disgusting White House statement that didn't even mention over 20,000. Now we're at over 25,000 Palestinians murdered. I mean, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. One thing after another. I mean, it just demonstrates Joe Biden. We already knew Joe Biden was a racist. I mean, he wasn't in support of desegregation in many ways. I mean, the guy,
unless you hear some of his press conferences where allegedly he was involved in the civil rights movement, which he never was. Which
or
he just
do you remember when he
recently
said
which we'll come back to later in the show. But no, it's a good point. His history is relevant here.
His history is relevant. I mean, there's also the whole like, oh yeah, Joe Biden. Remember when didn't he claim that he fought against apartheid in South Africa?
He actually claimed that he was arrested in South Africa on a fact-finding trip with, Ambassador Andrew Young, who of course was a former aide of Martin Luther King, at that time the UN ambassador. They asked Andrew Young about this, and he said, no, that never happened. I think I would remember if we got arrested. So it's true he was there on the fact-finding mission, but there was no arrest. But he actually repeated many of these lies, especially the whole thing about the civil rights movement, many, many, many different times. So it's definitely, I mean, it's just like how he said that he gave the speech the other day about Congress needs to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Well, when he was in the Senate, he was one of the number one people to do that. But, it's one of these things, Rania, I think, that points out the fact that, like, we are in a battle of ideas, right? Like, why is it bad to support this or support that? But as my friend Hannah always tells me, it's also a battle of emotions, a battle of ideas and emotions. And, the way that they try to draw this out of you, like, well, what about immigrants? What about Muslims? And I think that's actually what's very powerful to me about the Abandon Biden effort is like, it's not just Arabs and Muslims, but it's coming and emanating out of that community. So if anybody knows what the stakes are, this is a community that knows the stakes, and they're putting out a moral call to all other progressive-minded people. I think we have Hassan back, and I know you wanted to ask another question, Rania, so we'll do that right there before I go in some rant. Hassan, welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Glad we could fix that, because there was something I really wanted to ask you, Hassan, and that is, initially when this genocide began, you had whispers from inside the Biden administration that suggested that they were operating under the belief that Arabs and Muslims would forget by November 2024. And Joe Biden was recently asked by a journalist, outside his plane. You probably saw the clip. He was asked, there's a lot of Arabs and Muslims who are concerned and about what's happening in Gaza, and they're saying they're not going to vote for you. And his response was, well, basically, I mean, I'm paraphrasing Joe Biden, but he essentially pointed to Trump as being worse than him and wanting to deport them all, and that he cares about Arabs and Trump doesn't. And essentially, he was saying Trump is more racist than I am. And he thinks because of that, which is true probably, but because of that, they will vote for me in November. So I'm just curious your response to this notion that Arabs and Muslims are going to forget come November that Biden facilitated a genocide in Gaza.
That's definitely, thanks by the way for that. That's definitely not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing devastating feelings and a deep sense of betrayal. But I also think I could just let you know, and this is for the president to know, I have been speaking now since October when we started this plan, and it has taken some persuasion. Now, when I meet people who were actually concerned about abandoning Biden, I'm now on the precipice of many, many, many new allies coming in who are saying, that's it, 100 days and nothing, and no word, and not even the word ceasefire, and thousands of people dying. So where does this go? And one of the real issues, Rania, is that if we actually reward him for this, what does it say to the entire political landscape? It says that you can actually kill, destroy, torture, and then they still come and vote for you. So then never listen to them about anything. And what are we trying to do? We can't be saved by Mr. Biden. Right now, we need to think on the long term to transform this country such that this doesn't ever happen again, these types of attacks. And I also want to point out something really about this equation about I'm incredibly evil like the other guy, but I'm mildly less incredibly evil. And that is just truly a disturbing logic that we have come to the point. Please, to the Americans who are seeing me now, how could we be in a position where we're in a democracy, where we're seeking human rights, and the argument is that, yes, I am incredibly evil, but I'm less so? That is definitely not the situation that we should be in. And this is not the way that we envision this country and the way in which we should tell one another when we experience these moments at the kitchen table where we talk to each other and we describe what we want in the world. No one turns and says, I will continue to have these bombardments and deaths because it's just slightly less than what we think the other guy is going to do. And so I don't see any chance that Arab Americans, Muslim Americans are going to simply turn away and forget. It's really hard to forget. Like I mentioned, when you hear those statements, 24 people have just died of my family. I have been lost in the last hour.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hassan, for those who feel the pull of this call and understand its importance, is there a place they can find more information, get involved?
Absolutely. abandonbiden24.com. Please come on, volunteer. We have plans in all the swing states to partner with our allies, African Americans, Latinx people, progressive youth, libertarians, to ensure that Biden loses, and it sends a message to all politicians, to all staffers, to the entire country, to ourselves, that we must act morally in our politics because it's a representation of ourselves and what we expect in our children and grandchildren. And so I ask everyone to join in this effort as we work together. And it's a journey that doesn't end. If someone comes into power and they pursue policies that are also evil, together as Americans, we will fight for civil rights and ensure that America is saved, and this type of action, this policy of death, is not our legacy.
Mm-hmm. Hassan Abdel Salam, organizer with the Abandon Biden campaign, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Pleasure. Take good care.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are some very powerful words. And before we, move on to the next guest, Eugene, I just wanted to remind our audience to please do like the show. I'm very happy to see over 1,000 people watching, but they haven't smashed that like button. I'm not going to let go of that, Eugene.
I thought maybe we had gotten it all out of your system.
Nope, never. I see that I see how much you love. I see you smiling. So I assume it's encouragement for me. It's positive reinforcement. So I'm just going to keep going back to that saying until we have that recording where I can press the button. But you guys, seriously, please do like the episode. It helps us boost us in the algorithm. That is my role here as a co-host of Freedom Side, is to cajole our audience into hitting the like
I just have
button.
to say, if we do make the recording, Matt will control the button. You will not be allowed to control the button. But
oh, come on. I was like, I can't imagine why.
We're going to stick here with the electoral politics of the United States. Obviously, one big issue for Joe Biden that he needs to consolidate is the black vote, which many are saying is a little shaky for him. And we are very, very honored to be joined here by Mr. Shawn Blackman, who, among other things, is the host of Darker Than Blue Live on WPFW 89.3 FM Jazz and Justice Radio in Washington, D.C. Shawn, thanks so much for being back with us.
Eugene, Rania, thank you both so much for having me again. Great to be back.
Well, great to have you here. And obviously, we were talking about Mr. Biden and the black vote. I mean, there's so many different pieces to it. But I guess the place I wanted to start here is there's an article in Politico that came out recently, because many people have been saying because of Gaza, because of the economy, because of various different things, a lot of black people are thinking we can't, especially younger people, we cannot vote for this guy. So the headline of the article in Politico was, Biden has a plan to quiet his doubters around the black vote. So I opened the article thinking, wow, this is going to be like really interesting. They must have some intricate plan. Turns out that the plan just boils down to winning the South Carolina Democratic primary, because there are a lot of black people who vote in that primary, and they think like, oh, that'll show that black people love him. And he was, of course, recently there at the church, Emmanuel AME Church, one of the founders of which was Dean Mark Vesey, and he repeated yet again, Shawn, this lie that he was involved in the civil rights movement. So I've given you sort of a lot there, but I guess the core of my question is, do you think any of these things will actually help Biden?
Well, I got to say, I mean, Joe Biden saying that, he made some kind of contribution to the civil rights movement. That's just like when he said that he got arrested in South Africa trying to see Nelson Mandela. I mean, it's just one whopper after another with this cat. I mean, will this work? I mean, it's doubtful. I don't think it bodes well for Joe Biden or the Democratic Party that out of all the things, and many of them, I would argue, pretty basic, that his administration could do both now and in a potential next term to materially help black people. Of all the things they can do, that plan basically boils down to, winning South Carolina. Of course, we know that during the last election that South Carolina was an important state for Joe Biden in terms of the black vote. Of course, good old grandpappy Jim Clyburn was a big help in that. And Clyburn was also present with Biden during his positively shameful speech at Mother Emanuel, which, as a son of the church myself, I mean, I see it as a sin and a shame for a church that is rooted in militant struggle against white supremacy. Denmark Vesey took up the same kind of action that the Palestinian people are taking up right now, and have been for all of these years, taking their destiny into their own hands and want to throw off the shackles of oppression. But what this all really boils down to for me is something that I think a lot of us have suspected for a long time. And that's just that Biden and the Democrats really, they have no real platform or agenda that's really appealing to not only black people, not only young people, as I think your previous guest was speaking to, not only to Arab Americans, but to poor, working, and oppressed people in general in this country. They just have nothing to offer other than the fact that he is literally not named Donald John Trump. And when we look at the polls and how precipitously his numbers amongst black folks, young folks, Arabs, these same groups have dropped off, it's clear that that same old fear-mongering type of tactic simply isn't working anymore. And I think it says a lot that even though the Biden administration is very aware of the danger that they're in. I mean, Jim Clyburn went on CNN and said, I'm not just worried about the black vote. I'm concerned about it. And the fact that they know how bad of a situation that they're in and yet still refuse to do anything of substance about it, I think actually shows the real character of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's very well put, Shawn. And, it's amazing the way the Democratic Party leadership just constantly expects black people to vote for them. I mean, but black American voters are very loyal to the Democratic Party for historical reasons that are very understandable, but it's taken for granted so much to the point where, I'm sure you both remember during 2020, Joe Biden literally said, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. And he always likes to get he always likes to suddenly turn all I know how to talk to black people and I get to decide. I mean, just the audacity to say I get to decide if you're black or not based on whether you vote for me. So can you talk about the fact that, and we saw the same thing, by the way, with Hillary Clinton. With Hillary Clinton, it was just expected. Black people are going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And if they don't, they're just not even black. Yeah. Oh my God, I forgot about that. That was so embarrassing.
Playing dominoes. Anyway.
But what do you have to say about that? The way that the Democratic Party leadership, I mean, it plays this lesser evil game when it has nothing to offer. It's, well, we're not as racist as the other guy. And just taking this voting block that's actually incredibly important and wins them cities and states across the country. I mean, anywhere that's even a swing state, they need Black voters to come out for them. What do you have to say about that, taking the Black vote for granted over and over again every 4 years?
Yeah, Joe Biden rolling his neck at Charlemagne, the guy, about that was pretty crazy. But I think it's an example of just what we're talking about, because, and this is really the trap, what I call the hamster wheel of lesser evil politics in the United States, where you go round and round in circles but don't really get anywhere. So you see, Black folks are in a position where we're not supposed to actually demand anything that would actually be beneficial to us. We're not supposed to demand a return on the investment on the vote. We should just be happy to cast the vote in order to keep what is supposedly the worst case scenario at bay. And, you know, we were talking about Biden visiting the church in South Carolina. And in his speech, he talked about the poison of white supremacy in the United States, of course, talking about the Trump administration. And yeah, I agree. White supremacy is a poison, and certainly the Trump administration is an example of that. But I mean, Joe Biden has been a part of that very poison for basically his entire political career. I mean, we know that he praised a racist segregationist like James Eastland and Strom Thurmond and John Stennis. We know about his role in helping to construct the current racist mass incarceration state. And all of these sorts of things. But we're not supposed to raise any of that. We're not supposed to talk about that. We're not supposed to actually ask for something in return for that vote. We're simply supposed to fall in line and to go and cast that vote and to just be glad to do it. I mean, it really is a very sort of condescending way of dealing with a very important aspect of the electorate. And to your point, Rania, I think it shows how little the Joe Biden administration actually values Black America. They're so certain that we'll just show up, so certain that we'll cast that vote, regardless of what they say, regardless of what they do. They don't think that they have to actually offer anything of substance. And I heard Eugene mention, you know, Hillary Clinton talking about the hot sauce in the bag on the Breakfast Club. I mean, we all know that's a lie. Hillary Clinton looked like water is too spicy for her. You feel what I'm saying? And I mean, lest we forget that her husband, Bill Clinton, infamously went on the Arsenio Hall show in the 90s, which was a popular late night program for you young folks up there, put on a pair of sunglasses and played a saxophone. And look, there's this whole thing about Joe Biden bringing chicken to people. Look, if there's one thing that the Democrats will do, they will not put forth substantive policies to help Black folks, but they will pander to Black people in the most painfully ham-fisted ways that they can possibly conceive. And it's embarrassing for them. And they're doing themselves a huge disservice with Black people. And I think Black folks and poor working and oppressed people all across this country are more and more beginning to see that there really is no lesser evil when it comes to these two major ruling class parties in the United States. They are both racist. They are both sexist. Neither one has anything really positive for the masses of people. They have the same class interest. They simply have a different presentation. And so the whole lesser evil argument, I think, is becoming less and less potent as more and more people are deciding that they don't want to vote for evil at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, Shawn, it's a good point there you made. Of course, Biden constantly says that James O. Eastland was one of his good friends when he came into the Senate. Easily one of the most racist people to ever serve there. But the thing about it that is always notable to me, Shawn, is that the whole context of him bringing it up is the Senate was good when we were all friends and hung out and had dinner with each other. just for those who maybe don't know, James Eastland once said, "I have no prejudice in my heart, but the white race is the superior race, and the Negro race is an inferior race." And just if you didn't think that was enough, many years later, he went to Rhodesia, aka Zimbabwe, praised them. This is the apartheid Zimbabwe government, praised them for promoting racial harmony. And then subsequently, the head of the intelligence agency in Rhodesia, quote unquote, said that when he was there, he was complaining that they put him in an integrated hotel. And he said, "You've inserted the thin end of the wedge by allowing stinking N-words into such a fine hotel." Now this, of course, was the good friend of Joe Biden. Also an anti-Semite as well. So, anyway, he once also said, "After Thurgood Marshall, I could not go back to Mississippi if a Jewish Chief Justice was sworn in by the next president." So again, that's Joe Biden's good friend. He's a friend of the blacks, a friend of the Jews, but he seemed to love palling around with racist, anti-Semite segregationists. But we'll have to leave it there for now. Shawn, I hope everyone can check out Darker Than Blue Live, the new show with you and Jackie Lukman. By the way, I know it's on WPFW 89.3 FM. Is there ways those who live outside the DC area can find that show?
Absolutely. Best way for folks to see Darker Than Blue is to check out the video uploads on the shows on the Black Power Media YouTube channels and the Lukman Nation YouTube channels are uploaded there every week. And thank you both so much for having me again.
Thank you.
Wow. What was that chicken thing about? I wanted to ask because he said something about Biden offering chicken.
Oh, he went to meet with some guy?
Ask?
I think it was maybe a guy he knew. It was unclear. I didn't fully look into the story, but the point is he brought chicken, I guess, to the guy. I mean, I don't know if the guy had asked for him to bring chicken. I don't know what it was, but it looked... It honestly reminded me of that Dave Chappelle skit about the chicken when it's a whole other... Come home, buddy. Anyway, long story short, we're not going to get into that now. That's an amazing, amazing skit.
I'm sorry. That's just wow.
Yeah, so he brought him chicken. That's Obama used to traffic in the same stuff. The old don't be out here feeding cold Popeyes to your kids in the morning type stuff. Says a guy raised in hope. Let me not even get into it. But, it's just interesting who's willing to claim black culture and claim blackness when it's politically, expedient, but when they aren't. But anyway, we're going to move beyond that. We're going to turn our attention here to another very important part of the world in West Asia. That is Iran. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again by Mazda Majidi, longtime anti-war activist and an organizer with the Answer Coalition. Mazda, thanks so much for being back with us.
Hi, Eugene. Hi, Rania. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I want to start with a story that I think probably some people are somewhat confused about. There's some headlines, but not a lot of explanation. That's the tensions between Iran and Pakistan. Both countries have launched missiles into each other's territory, although it's maybe not at each other per se, but into each other's territory. Maybe just explain what's going on here, Mazda, because I think the way it's being presented is that, the countries may be headed towards a bigger conflict.
Yes, it's very inaccurate the way it's being portrayed here in the West. The southeastern region of Iran is the province of Baluchistan, Sistan and Baluchistan, and so is the southwestern region of Pakistan. In both regions, there's an insurgency, a separatist movement, but especially the separatist movement in Iran is supported by US and Israel. Now, this is a region that's very dry, very desert, and the forces there can kind of move in and out of both countries and Afghanistan, which is farther north for that matter, because it's all desert. And it's really hard to control the desert. There's very little water, very little population there, and so forth. So what has happened, particularly in the last couple of years, but it really goes back decades, but in Iran, the separatist forces, some of them with ties with Al-Qaeda, many of them with ties who get money from Israel, they launch these operations within Iran. They kill military commanders, including colonels and high-ranking officers. So what transpired recently was that Iran, after years of suggesting to Pakistan to be more adamant about controlling the separatists who are on both sides of the border, but in reality, in the Pakistan's region of Baluchistan, they seem to have a little bit of a freer hand. So Iran targeted some of the places where these separatist forces, either was their kind of militia centers or locations where had some significance for them. And of course, this was a cross-border attack, and Pakistan responded within a few days by targeting, in fact, similar forces, but on the Iranian side of the border. And of course, in this case, Iran protested and so forth. But in reality, this never really represented a deep divide between the two countries on this issue. But because, both countries have common interests when it comes to dealing with the Baluchi separatists. And so, in fact, right after the rocket attack that happened by Pakistan within Iran in a border town, both countries declared that we're not going to let this escalate, and both countries have friendly relationships and so forth. So this is not a conflict that has the possibility of becoming an escalating regional conflict.
And of course, the one that does have the possibility of becoming an escalating regional conflict is what's happening with Israel's genocide in Gaza. You have all of these non-state actors, groups like Hezbollah and the Iraqi PMF and the Houthis, as they're called, are Ansar Allah in Yemen. Well, I guess that is kind of the state right now. But all that said, I mean, these are all organizations that are very much organic and indigenous to their areas and consider themselves resistance groups. But you have this portrayal in the US media that actually, like, Iran is, because Iran is allied with these groups, is partnered with these groups, is actually puppeteering them. They're all just Iranian proxies that answer to the Ayatollah, and that includes Hamas. Hamas is portrayed the same way in US media. And as a result, everything that happens, whether it's Ansar Allah intervening by blocking ships that are heading towards Israel in the Red Sea to try to pressure the end to this genocide with economic consequences, or whether you have this sort of tit-for-tat violence taking place between Hezbollah and the Israelis in South Lebanon, or whether we're talking about the various Iraqi groups firing at American positions in Iraq and Syria, or Hamas fighting the Israelis. All of this is portrayed as Iran's hand. And so people are concerned that this could lead, if it continues, because all these groups are saying, as long as there's a genocide in Gaza, we will continue to hit at American and Israeli targets until the genocide ends. All this is being portrayed wrongly in the American media as Iran, and this could lead to a hot war with Iran. So I'm just curious, what is your take on what I just described, the potential escalation of a broader regional war that everybody's so concerned about, and how it's being portrayed in US media?
Well, you're right, Rania. And I think it's important to talk about this thing of portraying all these resistance forces as simply proxies for Iran. I mean, in a way, you can understand why the U.S. does that, because the forces allied with the U.S. are essentially mercenaries. They don't believe in anything. They don't fight for anything that they believe in. They get money, and there's actually many reports of mercenaries currently being used in Israel in the genocide of Gaza. And so the U.S. kind of assumes that, these other forces are the same. But these are the other component, though, and the other reason that the U.S. wants to look at it like that is just part of Iran versus Israel, Iran versus Saudi Arabia, is to dismiss the authentic, character of these movements. These are movements of people who put their lives on the line for their beliefs. And in particular, I want to emphasize the resistance in Yemen and the solidarity that the Yemenis are showing for Palestine. I mean, Yemen, having gone through 7 years of Saudi bombings and occupation and destruction, poverty levels of about 50%, and the economy in shambles and so forth. I mean, if you told me in mid-October that the Yemenis are going to play a significant role in solidarity with the people of Gaza, I would have laughed like Rania is laughing right now. And it's amazing, how could you be a people in so much hardship, in so much difficulty, disease, starvation, yet make it a priority to show solidarity, not in words, not by making statements, but in action with the people of Gaza. And if we have time, we can talk a little bit more about what those actions are. But the fact is, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Ansar Allah or the Houthis in Yemen or Hamas, these are genuine resistance movements. We could talk in detail about them and who they get support from, but none of these forces are proxies of Iran or anyone else for that matter. It is a lineup of forces in the region, as you might expect. There's the pro-imperialist, pro-Zionist forces. There's the pro-independence forces. And of course, these states and forces line up, providing support to one another.
No, I think that's a crucially important point, and I'm glad you raised it, because it does feel that is one of the elements that make it difficult for people in the West, especially, to really understand, is they're not understood as political movements. And it seems to me that they're not understood in their proper context, right? As if there has not been this massive U.S. attempt and, British attempt and French attempt going on for, nearly a century now to sort of shape and determine what, who will rule these areas, who cares what the people who live there think, and that there may be a reaction to that. So talk more, if you could, about that point that you raised at the end about who's really supporting these people and what this really represents, because I think there's such a sinister kind of framing put over it in terms of what's going on that people get confused about who's who and what's what.
Like Yemen in particular, Eugene?
Well, Yemen in particular, but any others you want to comment on as well.
Okay. Well, let me start with Yemen. I mean, the people of Yemen, of course, there were, political conflict. It's a country that holds elections. It had a parliament. It has a president. But of course, many difficulties exist. And like the biggest difficulty that the Yemenis suffer is Saudi intervention. If you look at a map, Yemen is part of the Arabian Peninsula, and it is the part that has no oil. So there's a vast difference between Yemen and Saudi Arabia in terms of wealth. When the forces called in the U.S. mainly or in the West as Houthis, it's a political formation called Ansar Allah. When they were beginning to emerge as victorious in the civil conflict in Yemen, Saudi Arabia intervened. It wasn't just Saudi Arabia. It was a coalition of forces led by Saudi Arabia, mostly reactionary Persian Gulf monarchies. And the war lasted for 7 years. Saudi Arabia, taking a page from the U.S. Air Force, bombed schools and mosques and weddings, and there were a lot of deaths. And of course, the U.S. fully supported them, and especially now, you can see why. I'm saying from the perspective of the imperialists, from the perspective of the reactionary governments in the Persian Gulf, it is very embarrassing today to have the people of Yemen, led by Ansar Allah, providing resistance to Israel and showing solidarity for the people of Gaza, where they have no interest whatsoever. Yemen doesn't have any borders with Israel, is not particularly close to Israel. But one point in geography is that, the waterway, the Gulf of Aden leading to the Red Sea goes through a narrow strait called Bab el-Mandab, which is, about 20 miles, and there's even an island in between it. So the ships that provide oil and other supplies to Israel have to go through the Bab el-Mandab. And despite its limited military capabilities, the Yemeni military has decided to target every Israeli ship and every ship headed for Israel with supplies as a way of providing support for the people of Gaza. But basically, whether we're talking about Ansar Allah and the Yemeni people and the Houthis, or we're talking about southern Lebanon or Hezbollah or Hamas, we're talking about movements, very much movements, not proxy forces, not even militaries, although they have militias and they have armed wings, but there are movements for independence against Israeli Zionism and U.S. imperialism. And these are movements that have existed in the region in one form or another ever since the end of World War I and the Sykes-Picot Treaty. And the U.S. can say, and Israel can say whatever they want about Hamas and Hezbollah and so forth. They may even, have successes in repressing them, but resistance itself is not going to go away, no matter how much they do it. And labeling this or that force as a proxy of Iran or another country is not going to change that fact.
Yeah. I mean, it really is such an incredible, mischaracterization that everybody genuinely believes. But I just want to ask you one more thing, and that is, Iran is, you mentioned ideological, right? Like you mentioned the fact that a lot of these other reactionary governments are just mercenaries. They're just in it for money. They're just in it for staying in power. Whereas these groups we're talking about, they sacrifice a lot, right? And they're doing it for something. They're doing it for their sovereignty, for their land, to protect their territory, to protect their people. And with Iran being such an important material supporter of all of that, I'm just curious if you can explain, why does Iran support all of these groups? Why is Iran partnered with all these resistance groups across the region? If you ask, the New York Times, it would be Iran just hates America and wants to make life miserable for America. But can you talk a little bit about Iran's reasoning there?
Well, I think the history of Iran, much like the history of Palestine, is almost never talked about in the West. So it is just they hate Americans, they like to kill people, this kind of stuff. But Iran, of course, went through the 1953 CIA coup. It wasn't a CIA-supported coup. It was a CIA planned and carried out coup. It was the first successful CIA operation in regime change, and they managed to overthrow the democratic government of Mohammad Mossadegh and put in the Shah as an absolute monarch. So from 1953 to 1979, Iran was under, U.S. client, the Shah, and one of the most ruthless dictators in the region, the Savak, Iran's version of the Mossad or the CIA, was known as having the worst. I mean, the UN called it having the worst human rights records on the planet. So when the revolution happened, of course, Iran had already gone through that, and various political groups and movements, there was no doubt as to who was responsible for the 26 years of an extreme dictatorship that they had suffered. It was Iran. Interestingly, one of the things that further solidified the role of Israel for the U.S. was the Iranian Revolution, because the U.S. Saw that no matter how many advanced weapons that you provide to right-wing governments, such as that of the Shah, there's always the possibility that the people will rise up and overthrow them. With Israel, there's not that chance, because the very foundation of Israel is based on being a settler state, a colonial state, and hostility to the indigenous people of the region. So now that there's no longer the Shah, I think Israel is even more valuable for the U.S. as a stable outpost in the region, although I must say that stability is now questioned by the uprising of the Palestinians against tremendous odds. But while it is hard to even know these things following the U.S. media, the people in the region know what's been happening in the region. And by the way, again, the problem with the solidarity that Hezbollah and Ansarullah and others are showing, these indigenous forces, these movements are showing with the people of Gaza, is how much the reactionary Arab governments are not doing, are in effect supporting Israel, or at most, making some broad statements while still providing supplies to Israel. If Yemen and the Houthis and Ansarullah can do so much to disrupt shipping to Israel, imagine if the Arab states, if the Gulf monarchies were serious or semi-serious against doing anything against Israel, imagine how much they could do. And I think that's very, very embarrassing to Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates to see the Houthis, Yemen, with such limited resources doing so much, and them just making periodic statements about, the Israeli approach not being helpful, or some statement to that effect.
Well, before we let you go, I just want to ask you this too, Mazda, picking up on that point. The opposition media, the Iranian opposition media, as you well know, has been since October 7th, filled with stories about how no one in Iran supports Iran backing Palestinians, that everyone thinks it's a waste of money, that no one's doing this. You travel often to Iran. You talk to a lot of people from many different walks of life. How do you respond to those sorts of characterizations?
It is, the opposition, the pro-US, pro-Israel media definitely say that. And that is definitely true about a part of the population. That's the more affluent people in northern Tehran and other cities to whom support for Palestine is bad. It's a curse word. These people are proud of themselves for stepping on the Palestinian flag. They take out the name tag of a street, Palestine or Palestine street, and they step on it and they take photos as a sort of a heroic act. But the majority of the Iranian people support the struggle of Palestine. There has been demonstrations in support of Palestine in many, many cities across Iran, in literally hundreds of cities and towns across Iran. Support for the people of Gaza is very strong. And I want to say this, there is very little variation across the region on this point. Yes, there is a sector of the population, the more privileged, that ally themselves with the interest of the imperialists and the colonizers, but the vast majority of the population have nothing but support and solidarity for Palestine. So in that sense, not only is the Islamic Republic not doing anything that's against the wishes of the masses of people, but in fact, they're responding for a demand by the people to support Palestinians in every way that it can.
Mm-hmm. Mazda Majidi, organizer with the Answer Coalition, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much.
That's always a good conversation with Mazda.
No, of course. It's good to talk to people who actually go to Iran on a regular basis and have some contact with them, rather than just having it laundered through, whatever media source and the various different levels and all those different things. Not that there's not useful media that comes out, but,
Are you suggesting that Ted Cruz and John Bolton and Bob Menendez, who I think is facing all kinds of fraudulent prosecution prosecution charges for fraud? Actually, I'm not sure. He did something shady.
Basically pay for play. He was getting money in order to push policies that supported Egypt and Qatar.
Yeah, there you go. Regardless, are you saying they're not the best sources of information on Iran?
I'm not only saying that, I would add that the New York Times and the Washington Post, also not great sources. The only English, I don't even know if they're even in Iran anymore. Both, Washington Post had the issue with the guy who was arrested. I don't know about the New York Times. I think the only U.S. media with someone permanently there now is actually AP News. But anyway, that being said, even when they are reporting from the ground, it's like when they report from Haiti or anywhere else, it's laundered through their lens at the hotel pool or whatever. So nonetheless, there's a lot to be waded through there. So appreciate Mazda, appreciate everyone who joined us in the course of the whole show. Covered a lot of ground here on the show, I think, Rania. I thought we covered it pretty well. Knowing that, would you also like our viewers to know before we leave?
Well, a couple things, Eugene. I'm so happy you asked and gave me another opportunity to remind our viewers to smash that like button.
Guess I set myself up for that.
Yeah, you definitely set yourself up for that. But no, I do want to remind
when people wonder why I took a long drink like that, it's alcohol. That's, yeah.
It's allergy. That's the only way Eugene can co-host with me is take the edge off. No, but in all seriousness, please do make sure you like the show during these live streams. It does help boost us in the algorithm. And also, if you do like our content here at Breakthrough News at a time when supporting independent media is more important than it's ever been, you can become a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News and signing up to become a patron. You can access exclusive content if you do, including parts of my show Dispatches, as well as Eugene's monthly seminar on Africa, and some very cool Breakthrough News merch. That is really cool. Here is one example of it. This very cool mug that we have that says our logo on it, Breakthrough News. Love this mug. I really do appreciate those who donated in the chat throughout the live stream. I just want to reiterate, at this time when we're watching a genocide unfold for now. We're about to enter the 4th month in Gaza. I think independent media is more important than ever because we've seen the corporate media just lie and cover up for genocide and lie some more. I mean, Eugene, just a couple days ago, the New York Times had an entire piece on how deaths in Gaza are down because under pressure from the international community and its allies, the Israelis are trying to kill less civilians in Gaza. And within 24 hours after that article, Israel killed over 200 Palestinians that we know of. So that's the sort of covering up of genocide that we're seeing on a regular basis in the U.S. corporate media. So I'm just going to go back to what I say. Please do become a member of Breakthrough News if you're able. Patreon.com/Breakthrough News and follow us on all platforms. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at BT Newsroom. And yeah, that's my spiel.
Well, I couldn't say it any better. Good spiel. Thanks, of course, to everyone who is watching, everyone who joined, everyone who donated, our whole Breakthrough News team behind the scene. And for myself, for Rania, and for the Freedom Side in general, we will see you next time.